Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Alifatul Hasanah. My ID number T2019-6075. Now I will explanation about theory of Roman Jacobson, nida, Peter Newmark, and koller. The first, Roman Jacobson. Roman Jacobson equivalence and equivalent effect. Jacobson followed the relation of set out by Saussure, the spoken and written signal and the signified. Structuralist Roman Jacobson described three kinds of translation. The first, interlingual, the second, interlingual, and the third, intersemiotic. The first, interlingual translation. Translation within the same language which can involve rewording or paraphrasing, and the second, interlingual translation, translation from one language to another, and the third, intersemiotic translation, translation of the verbal sign by a non-verbal sign, for example, music or image. Jacobson then moved on consider the thorny problem of equivalence and meaning between words in different language. One way to view signs is to consider them composite of signifier and a signified. Simply put, the signifier is the sound associated with or image of something. The signified is the idea or concept of the things. In Jacobson's description, interlingual translation involves substituting message in one language not for separate code units but for entire message in some other language. And for Jacobson, cross-linguistic grammatical and lexical form examples of difference are easy to find. They occur at the first, the level of gender. House is feminine in Romance language, neither in German and English. Honey is masculine in French, German, and Italian, feminine in Spanish, neither in English. The second, the level of aspect. In Russian, the verb morphology varies according to whether the action has been completed or not. And the third, the level of semantic files. The German Geschwister is normally explicated in English as brother and sister. And the English children, the statement I have two children is translated as the gender specific ages and Spanish if both children are female. And the second theory of nida, the nature of meaning. Affirm is semantic and pragmatic. Meaning is broken down into the following: the first, linguistic meaning, the second, referential meaning, and the third, emotive or connotative meaning. Formal and dynamic equivalence and the principle of equivalent effect. The old terms such as literal, free, and faithful translation, which were examined in Chapter 2, are discarded by nida in favor of two basic orientation or type of equivalent. The first, formal equivalent, and the second, dynamic equivalence. For nida, the success of the translation depends above all on achieving equivalent effect or response. It is one of the four basic requirements of a translation, which are the first, making sense, the second, conveying the spirit and manner of the original, and the third, having natural and easy form of expression, and the fourth, producing a similar response. Discussion of importance of nida's work. The key role played by nida is to develop the path away from strict or forward equivalence. His introduction of the concept of formal and dynamic equivalence was crucial in introducing a receptor-based or reader-based orientation to translation theory. The focus in this paper is notably on the impossibility of achieving equivalent effect when meaning is bound up in form. For example, the effect of word other in Chinese and English, especially in literary work. Also, that the closest natural equivalent may stand in a contradictory relation with dynamic equivalent. The example given is of the English word animal, vegetable, mineral, and monster. The closest Chinese equivalent are doing, and this all happen to contain the character. The criticism that equivalent effect is subjective raises the question of whether Nida's theory of translation really is scientific. And the third theory of Peter Newmark. Peter Newmark approaches to translation and textbook of translation have been widely used on translator training courses and combine a wealth of practical examples of linguistic theories of meaning with practical application for translation. Newmark suggests narrowing the gap by replacing the old terms with those of semantic and communicative translation. Communicative translation attempts to produce on each reader an effect as close as possible to that obtained on the readers of the original. Semantic translation attempts to render as closely as the semantic and syntactic structures and the second language allow the exact contextual meaning of the original. Importantly, as long equivalent effect is achieved, Newmark holds literal translation to be the best approach. In communicative as in semantic translation, provided that equivalent effect is secured, the literal word for word translation is not only the best, it is the only valid method of translation. Newmark terms semantic translation and communicative translation have generally reserved far less discussion than nida formals and dynamic equivalence. And the last theory about koller equivalence relation. Important work to define the concept of equivalence was carried out by Werner Koller in Heidelberg, West Germany and Bergen, Norway. Koller research into the science of translation. See also Koller examines the concept of equivalence more closely along with its linked term correspondence. The two can be differentiated as follows. Correspondence falls within the kind of contrastive linguistics which compares two language systems and describes different and similarities contrastively. And the second, equivalent, on the other hand, relates to equivalent items in specific actually, theory, pairs, and context. These equivalent types are listed below. The first, the native equivalence, relative to equivalent of the intralinguistic content of a text, and the second, connotative equivalence, relative to lexical choice, especially between near synonyms. And the third, text normative equivalence, relative to text types within different kind of text behaving in different way. And the fourth, pragmatic equivalent, is oriented towards the receiver of the text of message. And the fifth, formal equivalence, which is related to the form and aesthetic of the text, includes Words play and the individual stylistic features of the isti. Okay, that's all from me. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.